Our senior draft analyst, Ryan Wilson, has been doing mock drafts since the start of the regular season, and here is the latest one. He's got Bryce Young going first overall to Houston because of a mock trade from Chicago, which means that Will Anderson Jr., then going second to the Bears, and then a mock trade via Arizona. He's got CJ Stroud going to the Raiders. All right, I'm hanging out with Rick Spielman here in studio. We got Ryan Wilson to break down some of these first-round picks and predictions. I want to talk about 1 and 2 that Ryan has in his mock draft. He's got Bama's Bryce Young and Will Anderson potentially going 1 and 2. Would be the first players from the same school to go 1 and 2 in over 20 years. Now, Rick, we'll start with you. Just from being a GM, from your perspective, how special would it be to have those teammates going 1 and 2 off the board?
Well, I would say in the past it would sure help in recruiting if I knew that I was going to go to Alabama and you had 2 first pick and the second overall pick in the draft. But I think both of them are deserving to be in that slot. Both of them were dominant in the SEC, which is the best football, I believe, in college sports right now. And for them to get an opportunity to go 1 and 2, I think that's a realistic option that teams will look at.
And Ryan, we're showing it here. The last time was in 2000 from teammates from Penn State. I mean, can you just speak to this as well, how remarkable it would be, especially speaking to Nick Saban, to have 2 guys from Bama going 1 and 2 off the board?
No, it's truly a special, and Rick will tell you, he knows these young men as well as anyone not named Nick Saban probably, and they're both great young men off the football field, and certainly we know what they can do on the football field. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds in the NIL era and what it means for recruiting. But in terms of the teams at the top of this draft board who desperately need to get better, there are worse selections you can make other than Bryce Young and Will Anderson. I'm sure we'll talk about that over the next 4 or 5 months.
All right, and Ryan, I want to talk about another QB on there we've been talking about for the past weeks, months. We're starting with CJ Stroud. So drafting a quarterback obviously seems to be a pretty high priority for Vegas with the whole Derek Carr situation. And Ryan, you have Vegas trading up for a quarterback in the draft. Why do you think Stroud would be a good fit there in Vegas?
So one of the things that we're going to see play out over the course leading up to the draft is I'm going to have to break out the abacus to sort of calculate all these trade-ups, because this is going to be a real-life situation, unlike last year when the quarterback class wasn't that particularly deep. And Jacqueline, you mentioned the Raiders, and they're going to need a quarterback, and we'll have to see what happens in free agency, but I would imagine they're focused on the draft, and they're currently at 7, so I had them moving up to 4, or to 3, excuse me, and sort of a same trade scenario that we saw with Sam Darnold and the Jets a few years ago in terms of compensation. And Rick and I will probably talk about that in detail on the podcast. But what you get in C.J. Stroud is a young man who's already a better passer coming out of Ohio State than what Justin Fields was. Not nearly the athlete, but no one is. But he's certainly a better athlete than probably Derek Carr, who was pretty mobile with his feet. And we got a glimpse of that finally in that Georgia semifinal game. And I think C.J. Stroud, it's sort of crazy to say that he improved his draft stock, but I think folks around the league and certainly media folks took notice at his mobility in that Georgia game, because he put that team in position to have a chance to win at the end there, if not for a missed field goal. So I think C.J. Stroud did himself a lot of favors, not only over the course of the season with the way he threw the football, but with his ability to run with the football in that Georgia matchup.
And Rick, how do you think Vegas gets it done to get Stroud? And if they do,
they're not going to do that. We haven't even talked about that on the podcast yet, but I'll get him straightened out here shortly. You got a better chance of Carolina jumping up. I think with Josh McDaniels and him being the head coach out there, I think they're going to go with a veteran route, especially where their football team is. And they have Devontae Adams. They have a lot of very good players on that team. So I don't see them moving up. I see other team moving up to get a C.J. Stroud, because I think he's the second best quarterback in this draft that can lead a franchise after Bryce Young goes.
Yeah, we've heard rumors of Tom Brady maybe going to Vegas, just one of them. I don't know. We'll see what happens with the Raiders there. I want to talk about 2 defensive guys that Ryan has at 6 and 7 on his mock draft, and I heard there might be a differing of opinions when it comes to these 2 guys and you 2 guys, Tyree Wilson and Myles Murphy. How do these guys compare? Ryan, I want to hear your take. We'll start with you, and then Rick will have you follow.
Yeah, thanks for letting me go first, Jacqueline. Just so you know, Rick, this latest mock draft, I had Tyree going ahead of Miles, just so it would give you one less thing to talk to me and yell at me about. But Rick likes Tyree a little better than I do. I like Miles a tad more. Miles just turned 21 earlier this month, so he is young. Physically, he checks every box. He's about 6'5", 270 plus, and he is just learning. Like, he doesn't have an array of pass rush moves, but he's incredibly athletic. He's pretty twitched up, and he's going to get better. And you can see a defensive line coach watching Myles Murphy play and thinking, oh my God, what can I do with this guy when I get him in our building for the next 2 or 3 or 4 years? Now, Tyree Wilson's a little older, and he's a little longer, and I think Rick thinks that he probably has a little more upside, but Rick, you can tell me what you got on Tyree.
Yeah, no, I'm going to tell you that he's a little longer, he's a little older, and he has a little more upside than you just talked about. I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, you're like already like kind of like refereeing in the debate here. We've got like 3 more months to do this. But I think, especially I'm excited when we go down to the Cedar Bowl to really get a look at Tyree Wilson, because I think he has a lot of special traits that you can't teach, and these defensive line coaches are going to be salivating to get their hands on him with his length and his athleticism.
All right, and Ryan, on your latest mock draft with the 30th pick, you got Drew Sanders going to the Broncos. That is a trade from San Francisco, the only linebacker that is drafted in the first round. So why do you think that that's going to be a good fit in Denver?
Yeah, Rick and I are sort of like the odd couple, which is probably an old reference for you, Jacqueline, but I think we can agree on Drew Sanders, and we're going to disagree about Trenton Simpson, the other linebacker that has a possibility to be a first-round talent out of Clemson. But Drew Sanders, 6'5", he's about 235-ish maybe, and he is long. He came over as an Alabama transfer where he was playing outside. He knew he wasn't going to get a ton of playing time with Will Anderson and Dallas Turner there, so he went to Arkansas, and he has so many splash plays week in and week out from all over the field that gets you excited in terms of what you're looking for, and not necessarily an off-ball linebacker, but a guy that can play in the middle of that defense and do just about a little bit of everything. And I think he has a chance to go late round 1. Maybe he slips into the early 2nd round. But I love his tools, I love his motor, and I think he's going to get a lot better, Rick.
Yeah, no, and I actually agree with you on something, except I wouldn't list him as an edge rusher. I would list him as a linebacker, which was, I'm sure, a miscue on the prop we just had up. So, because he's shown this year that he can play off the ball. He can drop in coverage. He can blitz from being stacked behind the defensive line. He's very effective against the run, so he can do a lot of things. He reminded me a lot of when we drafted Anthony Barr, with that length, that athleticism, and what a mismatch he can create if you get with a creative defensive coordinator on how to utilize all his tools.
Rick Spielman, Ryan Wilson hanging out with us here on CBS Sports HQ to talk about Ryan's latest mock draft, which you can catch on CBSSports.com. And also, if you want to hear more differing opinions, a little back and forth from Rick and Ryan, you can check out their podcast With the First Pick. You can subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, listen wherever you get your podcasts. You can also scan that QR code. You're like recording that in a couple minutes, right?
Yeah.
Brand new content coming at you.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.